What if the thing that's exhausting you isn't the pressure? What if it's your resistance to it? Think about that for a moment. Most people spend their lives trying to eliminate uncertainty, trying to control outcomes, trying to predict what happens next, trying to make sure nothing unexpected shows up. And yet, uncertainty keeps showing up anyway. A difficult conversation, a leadership transition, a business challenge, a family conflict, a health scare, a setback you never saw coming. And the question isn't whether uncertainty will arrive. The question is, what happens inside of you when it does? Welcome to the Kathie Owen Perspective podcast. My name is Kathie Owen, and this is where we explore human patterns under pressure. I study what happens to people when the stakes are high, inside businesses, inside leadership teams, inside families, inside relationships, and inside our own nervous systems. For years, I've observed the invisible patterns that shape performance, communication, trust, decision-making, and resilience. One thing I've noticed over and over again is this: pressure rarely breaks people. Rigidity does. The people who navigate change most effectively are not always the smartest. They're not always the strongest. They're not always the most experienced. And they're often the most adaptable. A few weeks ago, I found myself thinking about something I experienced years ago while working in a high-rise building in downtown Houston. My office was on the 66th floor. On windy days, the building would sway. Not enough to be dangerous, just enough for everyone to notice. The elevators would slow way down. The building would creak. People would glance at each other in the elevators. Some would laugh nervously. Others would become visibly uncomfortable. You could almost feel the tension spreading in the elevator. But the building wasn't failing. It was doing exactly what it had been designed to do. It was moving with the wind. The flexibility wasn't a flaw. It was the feature that kept the building standing. And the more I've thought about it, the more I've realized that's true of people too. Many of us have been taught that strength means standing firm, holding the line, pushing harder, grinding through, controlling outcomes. But when uncertainty enters the system, that strategy often backfires. The tighter we grip, the more exhausted we become. The more we demand certainty, the more anxious we feel. The more we resist reality, the more energy we waste fighting what already exists. I've seen this happen in leadership teams. I've seen it happen during mergers and acquisitions. I've seen it happen with founders whose identity becomes so attached to the company they've built. I've seen it happen in relationships when people try to force certainty where certainty does not exist. And I've seen it happen in myself. Because if I'm honest, I like plans. I like knowing what's next. I like structure. I like predictability. And I like having a clear direction. But life doesn't always cooperate with our plans. You know the saying, if you want to hear God laugh, tell him your plans. Because pressure doesn't ask permission before it arrives. Change doesn't check our calendar. And uncertainty doesn't wait until we're ready. That's why psychological flexibility matters so much. Psychological flexibility is the ability to remain present when circumstances change. It's the ability to stay open to new information. It's the ability to tolerate uncertainty without immediately creating a story about what it means. It's about the ability to adapt instead of react. And that ability becomes incredibly important under pressure. One of the places I see this most clearly is in professional sports. People often assume elite athletes succeed because of talent. Talent matters, yes, but that's not what fascinates me. What fascinates me is what happens after the mistake, after the missed shot, after the strikeout, after the injury, after the losing streak. Some athletes adapt, others tighten up. And when people tighten up, something interesting happens. Their world gets smaller. Their thinking becomes narrower. Their options become fewer. Their creativity disappears. Their performance begins to suffer. Not because they lack ability, but because they're trying to control something that requires adaptation. The same thing happens in business. The same thing happens in leadership. And the same thing happens in everyday life. When uncertainty arrives, many people start fighting reality. They fight change. They fight new information. They fight possibilities they didn't expect. And in doing so, they create even more stress for themselves. Because uncertainty isn't the problem, it's part of life. The wind is going to blow. Markets are going to shift. People are going to change. Plans are going to evolve. The real question is whether we can move with it. Can we observe what's happening without immediately reacting? Can we stay curious instead of becoming defensive? Can we trust ourselves enough to adapt when circumstances change? The strongest leaders I've observed do exactly that. They don't panic. They don't pretend uncertainty doesn't exist. They don't become attached to being right. They observe, they adjust, they learn, they adapt. And because they adapt, they endure. The building survives because it moves. The tree survives because it bends. Healthy nervous systems regulate because they adapt. And resilient people learn to do the same. So this week, I'd like to leave you with the question: where have you been becoming very rigid? And what are you trying to force? What uncertainty are you resisting? And what might become possible if you loosened your grip just a little? Not because the pressure disappears, but because you learn how to move with it. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. And if you'd like to go deeper, I write a companion blog post for every episode. Each article includes additional insights, examples, reflections, and bonus resources that expand on the conversations we have here. You'll find the link to that in the show notes and description below. And until next time, keep observing the patterns, and I will see you in the next episode of the Kathie Owen Perspective podcast.